There are moments in life when we suddenly realize that our mind is like a lake stirred by a storm, full of turbulence, full of restless waves of unease that never seem to settle. Each thought passing through the mind echoes without end, pulling along a mix of emotions, making us feel as though we are living in a world of constant pressure, where even breathing becomes heavy. Modern humans appear strong, appear intelligent, yet when we look deeply within, we realize that we are being guided by invisible forces, nameless fears, bottomless desires, lingering disappointments, and even moments of emptiness we cannot put into words. Buddhism enters many lives not as a religion, not as a system of belief, but as a mirror reflecting the truth of the mind. It does not tell us to believe in anything, does not require us to bow down or worship, it simply invites us to observe ourselves, to look into the subtle workings of thoughts, emotions, and the illusions that arise every single moment. For awakening does not exist in some distant realm, it lies right within our own mind, in each breath, in each moment we are aware enough to look back at ourselves. But to transform the mind, we must understand that the mind is not a fixed entity. It is like a river, continuously flowing, continuously changing. The suffering we think is permanent is in fact only temporary waves. The joys we assume to be lasting dissolve like morning dew under the sunlight. Buddhism teaches this through the truth of impermanence, that nothing remains forever, not even pain. And from that understanding, the mind begins to soften, no longer resisting, no longer struggling against the unease that is happening. When we step onto the path of transforming the mind through Buddhism, we do not seek happiness somewhere else. We seek to understand ourselves. We learn to listen to the quiet sounds of the inner world, to recognize the layers of mist that veil our innate clarity. For deep within every person lies a source of light, yet that light is often obscured by desire, anger, illusion, and ignorance. Our task is not to create light, but to remove the layers of dust covering it. Buddhism opens a way of life in which the mind is no longer pulled by external conditions. We begin to realize that suffering does not come from the outside world, it comes from the way we react to that world. The same event can be experienced differently by two people, because their minds are different. Buddhism does not change life itself, but it changes how we see life. And that very shift in perspective, sometimes just a slight change of direction, is enough to brighten the entire inner sky. The transformation of the mind is not a process of forcing ourselves to be positive, nor is it pretending that we do not suffer. It is the journey of looking directly at pain without letting it control us. It is the journey of observing thoughts without identifying with them. It is the journey of stepping slowly inward, finding stillness in the midst of life's chaotic current. And from that stillness, a gentle wisdom appears, a wisdom that clearly sees the nature of the mind and the nature of life. Teachings such as the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, mindfulness, meditation, and compassion are not merely concepts. They are keys that unlock the doors of consciousness. Each door that opens is a layer of ignorance removed, a corner of darkness illuminated. When we truly live with these teachings, we begin to feel the transformation day by day. Anger no longer erupts with the same force, anxiety no longer stretches on endlessly, and meaningless cravings gradually subside. Only then do we truly understand why Buddhism can transform the human mind so profoundly. It does not bring us outer power, it returns to us the authority over our own mind. And when the mind is transformed, the world also changes, not because the world itself has changed, but because we have regained the clarity to see the world with new eyes. When we begin to go deeper on the path of transforming the mind through Buddhism, the first thing we realize is that the mind is far from simple as we once thought. It is not merely a place that contains thoughts and emotions, but a vast forest, within which there are countless species, countless paths, countless sounds that we normally never hear. And only when we stop, listen, and look closely do we see that most of our unrest originates from the mind's own restlessness, from the endless streams of thinking that constantly pull us away, making us live as if we are always lacking something. Buddhism does not transform the mind by suppressing it, but by helping us see it. For when we clearly see the true nature of the mind, what once caused our suffering becomes transparent. Try observing a moment of anger. When we are not aware, anger flares up like a fire that consumes everything, pushing us into actions and words that we later regret. But when we are truly present, when we can observe, this is the uncomfortable sensation arising in the body, this is the thought of wanting to resist taking shape, that anger softens like ashes. It does not disappear immediately, but we see through it. Just as when we look at a flame through a pane of glass, we are no longer burned by it. Transforming the mind through Buddhism begins with this recognition: every emotion, no matter how strong, can be seen. And anything that can be seen can be transformed. This is not philosophy. It is a truth that millions have experienced through meditation, mindfulness, and contemplation. 1. Seeing clearly the nature of suffering. Going deeply into the Buddha's teachings, we encounter the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of all transformation. The first truth of suffering is not meant to be pessimistic, but to show us that we are not alone in our pain. All beings experience moments of dissatisfaction, when desires are unfulfilled, when there is loss, when there is fear, when facing change. Buddhism does not regard suffering as an enemy. It regards suffering as a teacher, one that shows us the hidden bonds in the mind that we have never recognized. When we dare to look directly at suffering, without running away, without covering it up, we begin to see something wondrous. Suffering is not as solid as we imagined. It is not a cold, rigid block. It is like mist, the deeper we enter it, the more it dissolves. What causes our pain is not the event itself, but our clinging to the way we want things to be. When we loosen this clinging, we lose nothing, we simply give freedom back to ourselves. 2. Recognizing the spiral of desire and fear. The second truth the Buddha taught is the cause of suffering: bottomless desires, constant cravings, fears of rejection, fears of loss, fears of not getting what we want. The human mind is pulled between two poles, chasing after what feels pleasant and running away from what feels unpleasant. And it is precisely this chasing and fleeing that keeps us from ever being at peace. Buddhism teaches that desire is not the enemy. The problem is that we identify with desire. When we see ourselves craving something, we think that we ourselves are that craving. But when we observe more closely, we realize, desire is merely a wave of the mind. It arises, intensifies, and then naturally fades if we do not cling to it. The same is true of fear. Fear has no fixed form, it is only a natural reaction of the mind toward what it does not yet understand. When we clearly recognize these movements, we begin to return to being the master of our mind rather than being controlled by it. We begin to step out of the endless spiral of craving and disappointment, hope and fear. 3. The power of mindfulness, coming home in each moment. Mindfulness is not a rigid discipline, it is presence. When we breathe and know that we are breathing, it feels as though we are returning to our true home. The mind no longer rushes into the future or drifts back into the past. It stops right at the point where life is actually unfolding. And it is precisely in that moment of full presence, that the mind begins to be healed. Sadness becomes transparent. Anxiety softens. Anger loses its power. Everything that once exhausted us becomes an object to observe, to understand, and to transform. In every step, every breath, every subtlest sensation in the body, we learn to live as if we are seeing the world for the first time. Without judgment, without clinging, without expectation. Simply being present. 4. Compassion. The heart opens as the mind becomes clear. A mind that has been transformed is not merely a quiet mind. It is a mind that knows how to love. When we are awake enough to see our own suffering clearly, we also begin to see the suffering of others. And from that place, compassion naturally arises, not because we force ourselves to be kind, but because we understand. We understand that everyone is fighting battles with the shadows in their own mind. Everyone carries a pain that cannot be seen with ordinary eyes. Compassion makes the mind spacious. When the mind is spacious, the world also becomes spacious. Attachment lessens. Hatred dissolves. Rigidity softens. And in that softness, wisdom sprouts like a young shoot rising from moist soil. 5. Liberation. The mind sees itself. Finally, the greatest transformation that Buddhism offers is this seeing, clearly seeing that the mind is not me. The mind is only a flow of arising and passing phenomena. We do not need to be swept along by it. When we realize this, we naturally enter a profound freedom, where even suffering is no longer a chain. That is an unconditional freedom. A freedom not dependent on circumstances. A freedom that does not flee from life, but looks at life with eyes no longer veiled by ignorance. As the journey of transforming the mind through Buddhism gradually comes to a close, we look back and realize that the destination was never actually somewhere far away. It is not enlightenment in the way we once imagined, nor is it some perfect, absolutely pure state in which the mind is forever free of disturbance. The transformation that Buddhism guides us toward is also not a promise that from now on life will have no more challenges, no more sorrow, no more loss. More precisely, it is the capacity to look directly at these movements of life with an open heart and a clear mind. We begin to understand that what makes us suffer is not the pain itself. What makes us fearful is not the fear itself. What binds us is not the event, but the ideas we build around that event. The mind is the storyteller. When the mind is at peace, every story becomes gentle. When the mind is in turmoil, even the smallest story turns into a storm. But once we have learned to observe the mind, to let it operate like waves, we naturally are no longer drowned by them. The waves still rise, but we remain steady. The waves still crash, but we no longer believe we are the waves. That is the quiet freedom that Buddhism brings, freedom from the very streams of thought that once exhausted us. In each mindful breath, we find ourselves returning to real life. An ordinary morning becomes sacred. A simple step becomes a return. A moment of silence is enough to open the door to peace. When the mind is fully present, no longer chasing the illusions of past and future, we touch the deepest foundation of life, where we no longer feel carried away. No longer feel lacking, no longer need to compete with anyone for anything. Then we realize an important truth: transforming the mind is not something that happens in a single mystical moment. It is not a miraculous light that arrives and changes everything overnight. Transformation is the result of countless very small choices. The choice to breathe gently instead of erupting in anger. The choice to observe instead of judge. The choice to loosen instead of cling. The choice to understand instead of blame. The choice to open the heart instead of close it. Those choices, when repeated, become a path. And the farther we walk, the brighter the path becomes. The strange thing is that we do not notice the transformation at the moment it happens, only one day. When standing before something that once made our emotions surge, we suddenly find ourselves as still as a calm lake. At that moment we know, we have changed. Buddhism does not turn us into someone else. It returns us to ourselves, only as a deeper, more awake, more open version. It does not force us to discard our emotions, but teaches us to understand them. It does not force us to always be strong, but teaches us that strength lies right within our fragility. It does not force us to escape from life, but teaches us to live fully in each breath of life. That transformation unfolds in silence. It is not noisy like a victory, not radiant like an achievement. It is like the way the sun rises each day, quiet, steady, yet enough to illuminate the entire sky. And when the mind has that light, the outer world also changes its colors. The things we once feared become lighter. The things we once held tightly become more spacious. The things we once regarded as absolutely important become small waves on a vast ocean. Then we understand, life was never our enemy. It is ignorance, not seeing our own mind clearly, that caused our suffering. When the light of awareness is lit, life returns to its true form, impermanent yet wondrous, always changing yet full of potential, at times harsh yet also immensely generous. In the depth of this understanding, we begin to feel a kind of happiness that no longer depends on circumstances. A kind of peace that does not come from what we possess, but from knowing who we are in each moment. That peace may sometimes be simply the ability to take one gentle breath in the midst of pressure. Sometimes it is the ability to smile at something that once kept us awake at night. Sometimes it is the silence within even when the surroundings are noisy. These are the signs that the mind has softened, has widened, has come to understand itself more deeply. From there, compassion naturally arises. When we see our own suffering, we understand the suffering of others. When we know that we ourselves were once ignorant, we no longer blame anyone, for they too are lost in the darkness just as we once were. This generosity is not an effort, it is the natural result of a mind that has been illuminated. And so, the greatest transformation that Buddhism brings is precisely this return, a return to the breath, to the body, to feelings, to the true nature of the mind. A return to see that peace does not lie at the end of the journey, but right in each step we take. A return to understand that life does not need to be perfect to be beautiful. A return to live each moment deeply, as if it were a rare gift of the universe. In the end, what we receive from this journey is not a promise, but a truth. When the mind is at peace, life is at peace. When the mind is clear, the path is clear. When the mind is spacious, every difficulty becomes small. And when we have tasted that peace, even in just a single breath, we understand that we have stepped onto the true path of transformation. That path does not end. It is a current, an unceasing maturation, a continual returning to our most natural essence, little by little, day by day. That is the wondrous gift that Buddhism offers. The ability to transform one's own mind into a source of light.